Welcome back. Today we'll discuss whether or not Jesus existed as a historical figure and what evidence we have to show for such a claim. To start off, why is there a need to discuss such a question? Well, in the early 1800s, a German theologian named Bruno Bauer took up a position in which he claimed there was never a historical Jesus. This view has now commonly been titled the Jesus Mythicist view, or a person who believes Jesus is just a myth, like Zeus or Aphrodite. Recently, the position has been taken up famously by people such as Richard Carrier and Robert Price. It's important to keep in mind that almost the complete majority of historical scholars view Jesus as a historical figure, and so in this video I will simply show the certain facts and evidence scholars use to show the historical existence of Jesus. One of the first accounts or sources we have comes from a creed Paul shares with us in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 3-7. Paul was said to have written 1 Corinthians in around 55 AD. And the creed or tradition Paul states in this letter of his comes from the Jerusalem Christian community from around 30 to 35 AD. Keep in mind, Christ's crucifixion occurred around 30 AD. So the creed Paul talks about in which he mentions Jesus as a historical figure dates from the same year, if not a year or two after Jesus' crucifixion. Scholars believe this creed dates so early as the language Paul uses is that of Paul handing on tradition he had received. Scholars such as Bart, Ehrman, an agnostic atheist, even agree that Paul met the apostles, so it's very likely that he got this creed from them. The creed from Paul goes as such. For what I received I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he had appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Whether or not you believe the miracles the creed is talking about is not the point being made. The point being made is that we have an account of Jesus and his crucifixion which stem almost from the same year as his apparent crucifixion. Keep in mind, the majority of historical accounts of any other person in this time period usually come decades after the person's death. So for us to have such an early account of Jesus is rare, and it just adds to the credibility of his existence. I'm not going to cover the Gospels too much, as it's quite obvious they do document accounts of Jesus' life. Jesus Mythicists, on the other hand, completely reject them as historical accounts. Some even claim that the Gospels are based upon dying and rising mythological gods. They even try to take similarities between Jesus and myth-like gods such as Horus from Egypt. Suffice to say, almost all scholars agree the Gospels do provide historical accounts or traditions. As well, they do provide accounts which there would be no reason for the Christians to include if they were just making the stories up, such as the women being first to see Jesus' resurrection and even his crucifixion, which of course women's testimony was not regarded as reliable back then. To sum this up, the Gospels bear traditions which stem from way before them, such as the fact that Matthew and Luke both rely on Mark's Gospel, but on many occasions Matthew will tell a different narrative. Scholars believe this stems from before Matthew's Gospel being written. The same goes with Luke. The Church Fathers are important for the discussion of the historical Jesus. They do live towards the end of the 1st and early 2nd century, but regardless of that, scholars still look at them as more attestations of a historical Jesus. For example, Clement, Bishop of Rome, wrote around the 90s AD. He speaks of Jesus as a historical figure, and of course, even his crucifixion. Another church father would be that of Papias of Hierapolis, who spoke around the late 90s AD. Some even say he was tied to the Apostle John. He as well spoke of Jesus as a historical figure. There are a couple sources outside the New Testament which speak of Jesus, but in this video I will focus on Josephus, the Jewish historian. He wrote his Antiquities of the Jews around the early 90s AD. There is much dispute over whether he wrote about Jesus or if a later Christian added Jesus to his writings. Off the bat, scholars do say there was some Christian influence or interpolation in Josephus' writings, but they as well agree that Josephus likely spoke of Jesus as a historical figure. I will be taking the quotation from an Arabic manuscript of Josephus, which many scholars agree hasn't been affected by Christian influence. The quotation goes as such: "At this time there was a wise man who was called Jesus, and his conduct was good, and his learning outstanding, and many people from among the Jews and other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die, and those who had become his disciples did not abandon their discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after the crucifixion, and that he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah, concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders." Quite simply, from a historical perspective, we have an account of Jesus from a non-Christian Jew, which speaks of him as a historical figure who was crucified. Based upon all this data, it is clear we have many attestations of Jesus. Keeping in mind, we have about 2 or 3 attestations of Caiaphas, who was high priest during the time of Jesus, yet no mythicist or historian doubts his existence. Why should we then doubt the historical existence of Jesus when we have a plethora of material and accounts which come from very early on and speak of him? Thanks for watching. I have left all my sources in the description below, so I recommend you read them for yourselves. As well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and as always, God bless.